Eleanor Blake stepped off the creaking bus into the fog-choked streets of Hallow Ridge, her heart thrumming with a mix of excitement and unease. The town seemed suspended in time, boarded windows, cracked sidewalks, and the occasional flicker of a lantern in a shuttered house. The locals passed her by without a word, their eyes wary, as if the very mention of the cemetery would summon an unspoken dread. Eleanor tightened the straps of her satchel, the weight of her research notebooks grounding her as she followed the narrow path leading to the town's edge. Beyond the last cluster of houses lay the silent cemetery, a place whispered about in trembling tones. Moss-covered tombstones jutted from the mist like skeletal fingers, and the twisted branches of old oaks groaned in the wind. At the center, an ancient bell tower loomed, its darkened wood streaked with age and neglect. The air smelled of damp earth and decayed leaves, and a chill crawled up Eleanor's spine, though the evening was unusually still. Eleanor stepped cautiously between the gravestones, her flashlight piercing the fog. She noted inscriptions eroded by time, some dating back centuries. A sense of watchfulness settled over her, as if the cemetery itself were aware of her intrusion. Then, without warning, a sound ripped through the air, a violent, echoing toll of the bells, though the tower had long been abandoned. Eleanor froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound seemed to vibrate through the ground, rattling the tombstones and sending shadows flickering in unnatural patterns. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement, a figure crouched beside a weathered grave, its features obscured by darkness. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but when she blinked, it had vanished. Only the fog remained, curling around the stones like fingers reaching for her. She knelt near a particular gravestone, brushing away moss to reveal a half-buried diary. Its leather cover was cracked and brittle, but inside, inked pages whispered of horrors long forgotten. It belonged to a gravedigger who had vanished 50 years ago, his final entries warning of the bells of the dead, which will toll for the living if disturbed. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she read. The words seemed to resonate with the tolling that had shaken the air moments before. Then came the whispers, soft, urgent, impossibly close. She spun in every direction, but the fog swallowed the source. Shadows began to twist and writhe around the graves, forming shapes that seemed almost human. Heart pounding, Eleanor realized the truth. She had awakened something that should have remained at rest. She turned to leave, but the path back to the town appeared to have vanished, swallowed by mist. The bells tolled again, louder, more insistent, and Eleanor felt a cold weight settle over her. A sense of being watched, pursued, and judged by unseen eyes gripped her entirely. Somewhere in the distance, a faint, mournful chant rose from the cemetery, mingling with the tolling bells. Eleanor swallowed hard, steeling herself for what she could not yet understand. This was only the beginning. Eleanor returned to her small rented room in Hallow Ridge, but sleep would not come. Every shadow in the dim lamplight seemed to twitch with life. Outside, the fog pressed against the window pane like cold fingers, and the distant toll of the bells reached her ears, faint but unmistakable. Her hands shook as she reviewed the diary, searching for any clue about how to stop whatever she had awakened. The next morning, she tried to speak to the townsfolk about the cemetery, but each encounter ended in fear and avoidance. Whispers followed her as she walked the streets. One old man muttered, "The dead don't forgive, miss, and they never forget," before disappearing around a corner. Eleanor realized that the curse of the bells wasn't just a story, it was woven into the very fabric of this town. That night, she returned to the cemetery, determined to investigate further. As she stepped among the tombstones, the air grew unnaturally cold, frost forming on her breath despite the autumn evening. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse, as if the earth itself were alive. Then she heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps behind her, echoing hers, but she was alone. Turning sharply, Eleanor's flashlight revealed nothing, only the mist curling around the stones. A low whisper brushed against her ear, her name drawn out, pleading yet accusatory. She froze, realizing with a shiver that the dead were watching, learning, and waiting. She tried to run, but the path twisted unnaturally, looping back to the bell tower she had already passed. It was as if the cemetery itself was alive, reshaping to trap intruders. In a small clearing, Eleanor stumbled upon a grave that had not been there before, or had shifted. Its earth was freshly turned, and claw marks scarred the soil. She recoiled as a small, pale hand emerged from the dirt, followed by a childlike face with hollow, empty eyes. Eleanor screamed, but before she could flee, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving only the faint echo of a giggle. Her heart raced. She understood that the dead were no longer confined to their graves. The tolling of the bells intensified, each clang sending vibrations through her chest. Eleanor felt a pull toward the tower, irresistible and terrifying. That's when she met Reverend Ashford, the last living caretaker of the cemetery, standing silently behind a leaning gravestone. His eyes were grave, filled with a knowledge that chilled her to the bone. "They awaken because you came," he said quietly. "The bells have waited a long time for a living soul to stir them. Every toll calls another restless spirit from the grave. The dead hunger for closure or vengeance. You must decide if you will leave or face what comes next." Before she could respond, a shadow lunged from the ground, barely missing her. Eleanor stumbled back, heart hammering, realizing she could not escape. The child's hollow eyes appeared again, peering from the mist, and she knew that the dead would follow her wherever she went. As the bells tolled once more, Eleanor understood the terrifying truth. She had awakened a force that would not rest, and her journey to confront it had only just begun. Hallow Ridge itself seemed to shiver in anticipation of the horrors yet to come. Eleanor spent the following day in a feverish state of research, poring over town records, old newspapers, and the brittle pages of the gravedigger's diary. She learned that centuries ago, Hollow Ridge's founders had made a dark pact. Outsiders were sacrificed to the bells, their souls trapped in the cemetery, bound to toll endlessly in exchange for the town's prosperity. Each bell toll marked the awakening of a restless spirit, and anyone who disturbed them risked being drawn into their vengeance. Night fell, and Eleanor knew she could no longer avoid confronting what she had unleashed. She returned to the cemetery, clutching the diary and Reverend Ashford's warnings in her mind. The air was thicker than before, heavy with mist that seemed to cling to her like a living shroud. Shadows moved between the tombstones with purpose, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. The bells tolled violently, each clang vibrating through the ground and Eleanor's bones. Suddenly, the dead began to emerge. Skeletons and decayed corpses climbed from their graves, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the fog. Eleanor stumbled back in terror, but her determination held her in place. She saw the child from before, its hollow smile stretching unnaturally as it beckoned her forward. Whispers erupted around her in an incomprehensible chorus, pleading, threatening, mocking. The cemetery had become a maelstrom of restless spirits, and the ground beneath her seemed to pulse with life. Reverend Ashford appeared beside her, carrying a lantern that flickered with an otherworldly light. "You must perform the ritual," he urged, voice tense. "It is the only way to calm them. But the bells demand a price, a living soul willing to bind itself to the cemetery. Only then will the dead rest. Eleanor swallowed, fear clawing at her throat. She had read the diary's instructions, a ritual of counter-tolls, chants, and offerings, but the final cost chilled her blood. The dead surged forward, surrounding them, shadows stretched like black flames, twisting into faces of those who had been sacrificed centuries ago. They moaned and wailed, some reaching out with skeletal hands, others drifting just above the ground like smoke with intent. The sentience of the bells became clear. Eleanor could feel it pulsing through her chest, a malicious intelligence feeding on fear and life itself. Each clang of the bells called more spirits into being, testing her resolve, probing for weakness. Eleanor realized that hesitation meant death, that fleeing now would only make the spirits hungrier. With trembling hands, she began the counter-rhythm ritual, repeating the incantations described in the diary. The air around her thickened, the ground quaked, and spectral hands tried to pull her into the earth. The child's hollow eyes bored into her soul, as if silently judging her courage. Eleanor's voice rose over the cries of the dead, matching the rhythm of the tolling bells. The spirits shrieked and surged violently, but slowly, imperceptibly, they began to falter. The bell's malicious intelligence roared in her mind, resisting the ritual, testing her determination. Eleanor's heart raced. She understood the terrifying truth. To succeed, she must sacrifice herself, becoming the final toll to seal the dead forever within the cemetery. The choice loomed over her, cruel and inevitable. One wrong step, one hesitation, and the dead would consume her entirely. The cemetery, once silent, now pulsed with life, death, and the promise of eternal horror. Eleanor's fate and that of Hollow Ridge hung on the edge of the next toll. Eleanor stood at the foot of the bell tower, the air around her thick with fog, whispers, and the scent of earth long decayed. The cemetery pulsed with unnatural energy, the restless dead swirling around her in a storm of shadows. Reverend Ashford had fallen moments earlier, possessed by the spirits. His eyes rolled back as he muttered their chants in a hollow voice. Eleanor's chest tightened. There was no turning back. The bells called her, each toll vibrating through her bones, demanding submission. Climbing the rickety wooden stairs of the tower, she felt spectral hands claw at her ankles, shadows trying to drag her into the earth. The child's hollow eyes appeared again in every dark corner, its grin stretching impossibly wide. Eleanor's fingers shook as she grasped the rope of the largest bell, the one that had tolled violently the night she first arrived. Her voice quavered, but she began the counter-rhythm chant from the diary, words meant to undo centuries of dark magic. The bell screamed in defiance, swinging violently, their tolling echoing like the cries of 1,000 tortured souls. Shadows surged upward, faces contorted in rage and sorrow, clawing at Eleanor with skeletal fingers. She faltered for a moment, fear nearly overwhelming her, and a cold voice whispered in her mind, "Join us. Be the toll. Forever." Eleanor understood the cost. To seal the dead forever, to break the curse, she herself had to become the final toll, binding her soul to the cemetery. Her vision blurred with tears and determination, but she steeled herself. With one final trembling breath, she pulled the rope with all her strength, setting the counter-toll in motion. The bell shrieked, a sound so piercing it seemed to tear through reality. The dead screamed, wailing and clawing, then froze mid-motion. Shadows twisted violently, then began to shrink and dissolve, returning to the earth from which they had risen. The bell tower shuddered as the pulse of the cemetery slowed, the air clearing for the first time in centuries. Eleanor felt a searing pain as her body and spirit were pulled into the bell itself, her consciousness merging with the ancient mechanism, becoming its final guardian. Silence fell, the mist retreated, and the cemetery settled. Gravestones leaned back into place, and the air grew still. Hallow Ridge was safe, the restless dead finally bound once more. From within the bell tower, a faint spectral light glimmered, the essence of Eleanor, now a silent sentinel watching over the cemetery for eternity. Years later, a traveler arrived, curious about the silent bells and the abandoned tower. As they stepped toward the cemetery, a whisper drifted on the wind, soft but firm. "Leave, or be counted among the tolls." The traveler froze, feeling unseen eyes upon them, and glimpsed a pale, ethereal figure at the top of the tower, her face solemn yet protective. Eleanor's voice echoed through the air, warning, watching, ensuring the dead would not rise again. And though the bells no longer tolled for the living, anyone daring enough to linger in the cemetery could feel the pulse of her presence, a chilling reminder that the line between life and death, between salvation and sacrifice, was thinner than anyone dared imagine. Hallow Ridge would remember the night when the bells rang for the dead, and the soul who paid the ultimate price to keep the dead silent.